Welcome back for episode 20 of the Astronomical Apocrypha, the Seleukid Empire narrative let's play for Rome II with Divide et Impera. Last time, Antiochos Soter handed over the reins of his army and eastern dominions to his grandson, while he remained behind to govern Arachosia and meditate on the wisdom of Ashoka the Pious. Seleukos II and Euclid set out together and reclaimed the remainder of the Arachosia province before descending on the last of the Toxophila at Bactria. Seleukos personally led an assault on the ramparts while Euclid smashed a large enough gap in the wall with his artillery to admit Seleukos' Syrian war elephants, which decimated the garrison. The younger brother of Seleukos II, now having claimed the title Antiochos for himself, has sought to achieve his aims through military action against a longtime Seleukid ally, Pergamon, wresting control of Pessinous with the help of Sophocles, while Eualcides made a coordinated strike on Katpatukan at Sinope when they refused to stand aside. Diogenes, also attempting to participate in the coordinated attack, found himself nearly overwhelmed by King Philoteros at Adamatu, but managed to conjure another victory from unfavorable odds. Unfortunately, an even more daunting battle lies ahead as Eugenios has found himself in the crossfire in a dispute between Rhodes and Persia. Most alarming, however, is the disagreement between Rome and Antiochos Theos over the flow of slaves from Pannonia, with diplomacy very quickly giving way to outright hostility.
I think you have lost your way, Roman. This part of the sea belongs to Poseidon. You stand before the house of Zeus in the presence of the god of Egypt, Antiochos Theos. Announce yourself and your purpose to the king. My name is Spurius Titinius, diplomat of the Roman Senate and champion of the citizens of the Roman Republic. Rome has, at great expense, all but vanquished the Phoenician threat of the western Mediterranean. We had expected Ptolemy's assistance in the matter, but it seems we must instead deal with you.
Ptolemy's corpse has been stripped to the bones by the hot sands of Nabatea, while his sister warms my bed. We offer no assistance against Carthage.
And none is needed. Carthage is vanquished, but the war has taken its toll and your trade to the enemy has done nothing to shorten our struggle. We will overlook your indiscretions if you in turn will ignore our operations in Pannonia. If you refuse, the consuls have authorized me to declare war. What will it be, God King?
I need some time to think about it.
Very well. Take as long as you like. But please decide before you step out of the circle that I have drawn at your feet. I will await your messenger aboard my ship.
We're right back where we left off, with Eugenios in the shadow of Helios staring down a pair of Rhodian armies in the desert of Yathrib. Although his army boasts heavily armored infantry, he lacks some key elements such as cavalry, artillery, and offensive infantry. We'll see how this mostly Judean army stacks up against the Rhodian phalanx and Thurios infantry. The battlefield is mostly flat, but there's a slight hill created by some sand dunes in the southwestern corner, which is convenient since we can also try to use the borders of the battlefield in a somewhat unrealistic way to guard our flanks. Our chance of victory depends almost entirely on how well or how poorly the AI makes its assault. The primary attacking army is making its approach from the north, while the other is making its way onto the battlefield from the southeast. Neither force makes an immediate assault, but instead they move toward one another to rendezvous before striking, unfortunately eliminating any chance we might have of taking them on piecemeal. I also can't send out my slingers to skirmish independently since they would be under severe threat of being destroyed by cavalry. The two Rhodian armies join up, but then instead of attacking immediately, they begin reorganizing their formation repeatedly, regiments marching back and forth, and it's almost as if they're putting on a parade or taunting us. Although irritating to watch, this poses no real threat to us since time is on our side, although I hate to wait for an hour just to win a field battle. It looks like their cavalry will be on the wing, so hoplites stay out wide. Wait, looks as if they're moving peltasts out to harry our flanks. And their phalanx formations are now countermarching, sideways. Hold on. This is either a brilliant trick or pure stupidity. They seem to be putting on a parade. I heard of Alexander routing a whole army of barbarians by intimidating them with his maneuvers and a great war shout. We have the high ground and are interposed between them and their city. They can come at us or die of thirst in the desert. No parade marching is going to scare off the shadow of Helios. The Rhodians eventually realize we won't be taking the bait and begin marching forward in a staggered infantry line with cavalry on either wing. The heavy citizen cavalry do not pose a great threat to us from the front, as the regiment on the eastern side demonstrates by running uphill into one of our hoplite units. The lighter skirmish cavalry, however, could cause major damage to our spearmen with their lethal javelins if allowed to deliver their entire payload, and I focus my slingers on these units, along with the infantry peltasts moving up to hurl javelins into our Judean spearmen. This works to some extent, and the Thurio skirmish cavalry on the west find their numbers dropping rapidly from the Jewish slingstones and spur their mounts into melee against the hoplites, which of course only accelerates their demise. After destroying the Thurios cavalry, both regiments of the Western Hoplite Detachment gang up on the adjacent citizen cavalry, with the skirmish engagements on each wing now winding down. The bulk of the Rhodian infantry make contact with our Judean spearmen, anchored in the center by Eugenios' shield-bearer hoplites. Eugenios doesn't have much in the way of general abilities, but I go ahead and fire off his war shout, since he has 3 uses of it, although the first shout does very little to diminish the Rhodian spirits, especially since the enemy general quickly counters with a morale-boosting shot of his own. So far, we've broken or contained 4 units of enemy cavalry, begun to wrap around the western enemy flank, and already 1 regiment of Rhodian spearmen are wavering. The odds are still against us, but already the balance bar looks better than what Diogenes was dealing with at Adamatu. I next set my slingers to work against the multiple Rhodian peltast regiments in their rear, as our men on the left finish up the citizen cavalry and then begin descending upon the western Rhodian flank adjacent to Eugenios, where our general is easily holding off 2 enemy regiments, having nearly routed 1 already. The picture on the eastern flank is not as rosy, although our hoplites there are holding back the enemy citizen cavalry and several infantry regiments, including their general's retinue. In the center, however, things are not going well, as 2 units of Judean spearmen are being pulverized by about 6 units of enemy spearmen, plus a very dangerous Thurio sword regiment. Much more quickly than I'd hoped, one of the 2 beleaguered Judean Thurios units gives way to the pressure and begins retreating, opening a large gap in our line to the right of the center, Rhodian spears streaming through the opening and threatening to bring down the entire defense. With the Jewish slingers scurrying for safety toward the western flank, I pull one of my Western Greek hoplite units to move behind our general and counter the units coming through the breach in our line. This will protect Eugenios, but now our force is split, our Eastern Hoplite detachment isolated, and the far-right Judean spear regiment now being torn apart in melee. Eugenios, in a desperate bid to salvage the battle which is now rapidly slipping from his grasp, sends his slingers around to the left flank, although they keep getting distracted and sticking to the melee clusters on the way, losing some men in the process. Around the edge of the fighting, they concentrate their fire on the free unit of peltasts, although I'm forced to change targets as the Rhodians dispatch a unit of slow-marching phalangitai to threaten my slingers. Fortunately, with the enemy cavalry destroyed, my slingers are now extremely dangerous light skirmishers, and they quickly fend off or destroy the units sent after them. With even the enemy general realizing the futility of chasing these lightly armored men through the desert, I'm free to move them all the way to the enemy rear and begin pelting the rear of the enemy, engaging our few remaining infantry, which have declined by this point to Eugenios and his shield bearers, 2 regiments of Greek hoplites, and 1 unit of Judean spears remaining. Morale is now poor in general, with regiments wavering on either side. One of my Jewish slinger levies having depleted their ammunition, I dispatched them to the rear of an elite Rhodian spear regiment fighting our hoplites on the rest, as the other 3 slinger regiments continue to throw the few sling stones that they have remaining. My hoplites on the western side have gotten into a bizarre engagement, fighting on a narrow front against a unit of Phalangitai, a fight that's going nowhere fast, so I extract them from this fight and try to redirect them to the main engagement where Eugenios is trying to hold out. But unfortunately they just can't make it in time, and just as my slingers run out of ammunition, Eugenios finds himself in the fight alone against impossible odds, and the battle is lost. Eugenios survives the battle, but unfortunately makes a very foolish choice in his retreat, fleeing back toward the Rhodian city of Yathrib, which sadly places him in the reinforcement range of the garrison. Though as you can see, we could probably beat what little remains of the Sons of Ares, the city garrison makes this an easy fight for the Rhodians. Having no option to retreat, I leave Eugenios to his awful fate. Along with the death of Eugenios, rousing the ire of the island nation of Rhodes has some people along the coast whispering that the gods of the sea are themselves offended. What price, if any, should be paid is the question being asked, with this priest Anaxander saying that only a pure white bull will do, and if none can be found, a child sacrifice will be necessary. With the power vacuum in Babylon and Seleukia, it's quite possible that this might have happened if not for the efforts of a royal cousin, Antiochos, who steps forward to offer his finest bull to be sacrificed to regain the favor of the gods and the people. First on the agenda for the spring of 235 BC is the conquest of Adamatu by Diogenes, who has now turned the situation on its head, having destroyed the Pergamon army and garrison force in the field. With about 25% losses predicted, I decide to take the auto-resolve here, knowing that we'll get some excellent replenishment once the region is under our control. And as predicted, Diogenes gets a decisive victory, occupying the city and getting some fantastic replenishment with a key route through the Arabian desert now secured. The remnants of Pergamon nearby, the leaderless Gigantes, are no longer a threat, the danger in the region now constituted by the hostile Rhodes force from Yathrib to the south. We lost Alcandre last episode to a Parthian agent, leaving me a spy slot open, so I recruit another low-level spy named Denia, a former sacred prostitute from the Temple of Ishtar, explaining her seemingly contradictory virtuous and brothel worker traits. I do need an army close to the center of our empire to hopefully reinforce Ecbatana, and I've decided to elevate Antiochos at Babylon, reinstating the legacy of the Shadow of Helios, but we'll give them a new name in honor of Antiochos' sacrifice to the Babylonian god of the sea. Accordingly, I'm going to set him up with a Mesopotamian-style army, starting with some heavy spearmen and archers. On the other end of the war with Pergamon, Antiochos Hierax is now in range for an attack on Nicomedia, and Cordelian moves into the Strait of Bosphorus to assist his assault on the port of Nicomedia and provide the prince passage into Thrace afterward. At first I couldn't figure out why Cordelian wasn't participating in this battle, but eventually I realized I'd left him on raiding stance. Having set him back to a neutral stance, he's able to properly blockade the city to lead the attack. In terms of percentage, the losses are low to moderate, in the 25% range, although after I took the auto-resolve, it's worth noting that numerically it's really a large number of men, on the order of 2,000. Nevertheless, we now have control of the Strait of Bosphorus, along with the entire southern coast of the Black Sea. Antiochos Hierax will remain here to replenish his force for now, but he should be able to move into Thrace soon, and will part ways with Sophocles for a time, who moves south back to Pessinous. During the intern phase, there's a naval battle that occurs in the Mediterranean, with our allies Amphiros and Rhodos getting pummeled by 2 Roman fleets. We also learn as the summer months begin that Parthian agents already implicated in Alcandre's death have not been idle, showing their range of abilities by this time trying to tempt our new noblewoman Metrodora into defecting. She hasn't defected, but certainly seems to be considering their offer. I tried to strike back against the Parthian agent, Neria, the Eyes of the King, but Metrodora's offensive capabilities are so bad, it's not even worth considering. Instead, she just goes back to her usual business of governing the province. My new scout, Denia, tries her luck at hindering the Rhodians, who are now on their way toward Hegra, but unfortunately she fails in her effort. Given that, instead of pursuing the Rhodian army in what would clearly be a vain attempt to intercept them before they reach Hegra, Diogenes takes another tack, moving his army southeast instead of southwest, threatening Rhodes' colony at Yathrib and hoping to draw their army back to defend their settlement. It appears Persia, again playing the role of opportunistic satrapy, have countered the Katpatukan occupation at Raga, but unfortunately they've replaced it with a Persian occupation, while the Katpatukans remain at the walls of Ecbatana. I don't think Antiochos is quite ready, and I want to add some more men to his army, this time choosing some costly but impressive-looking elite Akkadian infantry. Cordelian ferries Antiochos Hierax to the far bank of the Bosphorus, and then he departs south into the Sea of Marmara. Antiochos Theos moves from his long-held camp in Illyria into Roman territory near Patavium. Unfortunately, Rome isn't the only new enemy to contend with, as our empire is now bookended by conflict, Parthia now declaring war on Seleukos II. What follows is a harrowing trio of strikes by Katpatukan, who begin their retaliation by making their assault on Ecbatana, ahead of Antiochos' intended reinforcement. While we have a large garrison at Ecbatana, the troops are poor quality. The attackers aren't an elite force either, but do have several cavalry units, Galatian mercenaries, and a stone thrower. The Katpatukans have a large amount of siege equipment, which is going to make this defense difficult. I line up my archers on the wall, interspersed by hoplites, while the garrison captain's regiment holds the area beneath the gatehouse, and the cavalry stand by to exit the northeastern gate near the river. We're enforced to endure minutes of protracted Lithobolos fire as the flaming projectiles come arcing in at the gatehouse and the adjacent wall. After several minutes go by, the first sign of impending collapse manifests as part of the wall crumbles away, killing several hoplites and archers on that section of the wall, so I move what remain of their regiments off the wall into the courtyard. Sadly, the Lithobolos isn't done, and while I wait for them to exhaust their ammunition, I move my citizen cavalry around toward the enemy flank to see if I can draw off their skirmish cavalry. This actually turns out to work very well at first, as the citizen cavalry draw the speedy Paphlagonian cavalry into the shallow water of the river crossing before wheeling about abruptly and descending on their pursuers, completely destroying the lighter missile cavalry in a matter of seconds. Heartened by how well they seemed to work, I decide to try again, feinting a strike on the Katpatukan archer infantry, and again the Paphlagonian cavalry taking the bait, streaking off in pursuit of our citizen cavalry, who again are riding hard for the river crossing. As we reach the ford, I don't have as much of a lead, and the Paphlagonian cavalry get a free volley into our hapless men as they thrash about in the water. Reaching the far side, I see they've entered the crossing and circle back to strike at them, but then they anticipate the maneuver and back away to the opposite bank. I then try drawing them completely across to see if I can corner them on the opposite side, but no matter what I seem to do, they are much more quick and elusive, and my cavalry are beginning to tire. At this point, my cavalry having dipped below half strength and slowing their speed, the hunter becomes the hunted as the Paphlagonian cavalry continue their nimble dance, pausing every so often to launch missiles and further deplete our men. Fortunately, even in their tired and depleted state, the citizen cavalry are by far the superior melee combatants, and the Katpatukans misjudge the situation and launch themselves into melee only to be ripped apart by the few men who remain of the citizen cavalry regiment. In total, we managed to destroy both Paphlagonian cavalry, but essentially lost our own citizen cavalry in the process. Probably an even trade if I had any more cavalry left, but it turned out to work against us in the long run. That minor skirmish out of the way, the Katpatukan stone thrower has finally run out of ammunition, and their infantry begin wheeling their multiple ladders up to the wall, seemingly not that interested in the breach they've already created, the battering ram even running into the same problem I had previously, an open gate preventing the ram from doing its job. The problem that I have is that the light Phrygian infantry making their way to the wall are well suited to combat garrison spearmen, which is about all I have. The battle on the wall is mostly a slow grind to see how our garrison spearmen fare against the Katpatukan infantry. Initially, it's mostly a slow back and forth with a few men dying on either side, but after watching the entertainment for a couple of minutes, the Cappadocian commander decides he's seen enough and sends forward the rest of his army, personally leading his own retinue and a small detachment into the breach adjacent to the gatehouse. For one brief moment, my citizen cavalry return to the battle and make an assault on the now isolated Lithobolos, although they just don't have the numbers or the morale to seal the deal, and wind up routing themselves before they finished off the artillery crew. My garrison hoplites just aren't up to the task of defending the city against some of the sword-equipped infantry, let alone an elite general's bodyguard. So even though things look relatively even by the numbers, it turns out to be a slow but continual erosion of our ability to defend the city. And once the Katpatukans have taken the walls, the battle is essentially over as they reach the courtyard and assault my garrison commander's regiment from the rear, even as he attempts to fend off multiple units attacking him from the front. With the demise of my garrison captain, nothing stands between the Katpatukan commander and the victory objective, and he makes his way there unimpeded, as my last few defenders on the wall try without success initially to break the Hyrcanian hillmen. As the Katpatukan commander captures the victory objective, my defenders actually make some progress breaking the Hyrcanian hillmen and some levy spearmen at the wall, but as the numbers count down, we just can't drive off the last regiment quickly enough, and the Katpatukans take the city. We did substantial damage to the attacking force, but they still have over half the men in the army. Following the sack of Ecbatana, the Katpatukans go on a killing spree, running amok through the countryside and stopping only when they encounter Antiochos and his new force blocking the mountain pass to Babylon. Strangely, the balance bar appears slightly in our favor, although the stance appears to cause radically different results, with an aggressive attack resulting in a decisive defeat, but either balanced or defensive postures resulting in a Pyrrhic victory. This finally contains the Katpatukans, forcing their now very damaged army back into the Median countryside and forcing them away from Babylon. However, the Katpatukans still have more attacks headed our way, the aptly named fleet of the Grudge of Salamis making an attack on the positively minuscule garrison of Sinope. I was going to auto-resolve this battle anyway, figuring it'd be a sure victory for the Katpatukans, but for whatever reason, although the other stances predict certain defeat, an aggressive posture promises a decisive victory with almost the entire garrison remaining. I wasn't sure if this was a mistake or a bug, but I decided to take it, and sure enough, we not only win but manage to sink the entire enemy fleet in the process. Aside from these lucky auto-resolve results, this in-turn phase remains one of bad news, Kyrenica now under attack by the Garamantians. Already being at war with their big brother Rome, I decide to support our own ally Kyrenica against them. Now more bad news, albeit not necessarily unexpected, as Rhodes ignore Diogenes' maneuvering and continue their course to attack Hegra. This time it's a minor unwalled settlement defense, with a moderate-sized full-strength garrison of bottom-of-the-barrel tier troops. This is the same Rhodian army that defeated Eugenios earlier, and many of their units are quite damaged from that fight, although the Phalangitai pikes and the Theos swordsmen remain near full strength and particularly dangerous in fighting along the narrow streets of a city. The Rhodians are coming in from the south, where there's one somewhat wide entrance to the city that quickly bifurcates into roads leading west and east. After some consideration, I decide to divide my defense primarily on either side of this fork, so that if the enemy commit one way or the other, I can move in the adjacent force to flank them. So far, they're playing right into the strategy, funneling their men into the gap, a single unit of Theos swordsmen attacking my hoplites at the western avenue, and most of the other units heading for the eastern side. Unfortunately for me, their swordsmen were probably the best choice to send on their own, as they're very difficult even for the heavily armored hoplites to contend with in melee. I'm afforded the opportunity to rain arrows down overhead into the dense cluster of attackers, even trying to target my archers into the rear of units who move toward the opposite side. Nevertheless, our garrison spearmen are faced with a very difficult job, and they just can't hold up against superior units, even when several of those units are quite damaged. After the citizen militia have fled, the hoplites guarding the western fork are next, and now there's nothing between my archers and the oncoming cluster of the Rhodian infantry. However, they're lightly equipped, fast on their feet, and with room to maneuver due to the large open area inside the city. First destroying the weakened regiment of Theos swordsmen, they next turn their attention on a regiment of garrison spearmen, also routing those. 3 more regiments enter the open area where my Toxitoi continue their harassment of them, skirmishing away and destroying a unit of Peltas before felling a charging group of Phrygian spears. And finally, as one unit faces down some Rhodian Phalangitai, the other 2 archer regiments fire volley after volley into their backs. For a moment, I thought we might be able to bring those down as well, wondering if I could take on the entire Rhodian army if only I had more ammunition. But at that moment, my archers run out of arrows and I try committing them to melee to see if I could break the Phalangitai and another unit of Peltas that join them. But the death of our garrison captain causes my archers to finally lose their nerve and flee. We didn't actually cause all that much damage to the enemy in this fight, only about a third of their men becoming casualties, but the archers did perform very well, the 3 units together accounting for about half of our kill count. The Rhodians don't take Hegra, only sacking it, as Diogenes is left to look on in disapproval. Income has dropped steeply the following turn, likely much of the shortfall in revenue due to the damaged infrastructure in Media and Nabatea. It's now our turn to exact some revenge, and I start with one of my surest bets in a fight, Eualcides, who smashes both of the Katpatukan armies hanging around Trapezos, at virtually no cost to his own force. Eurydice tries manipulation against the Roman agent at Ariminum, but fails in her effort. Nevertheless, having seen the lack of Roman defenses in Liguria due to her scouting, Antiochos Theos moves in to conquer Patavium, and even with the somewhat mediocre force at his disposal and his having recently given up his early retirement in Illyria, he's still a force to be reckoned with on the battlefield. It's probably fortunate that we took this settlement when we did, because Patavium is clearly set up to be a military installation, having both an auxiliary camp and a Roman barracks in addition to the Tier 3 glassware producing minor settlement. Scrolling through the list of agents, I noticed that Metrodora is no longer among them. Although we got no notification of this, it appears the Parthians managed to turn her completely. Anastasia, however, is going to demonstrate what happens to nobles who join our enemy to the north, moving stealthily among the population of Artacoana until she's face to face with Metrodora, plunging a hidden dagger into the noblewoman's chest. My other scout, Denia, continues to have a lack of success against the Rhodian army at Hegra, again failing another sabotage attempt. Although I'm tempted to double back with Hegra still in our control, Diogenes continues to stick with the plan and continues his march south to Yathrib, now almost in range of the city. After having seen the effectiveness of the Parthian agents and their clear intent to do us harm, I decide it's best to move Seleukos and Euclid out from Bactria and away from the two Parthian agents there, heading west toward Antioch and Margiana. Pergamon now come back to Adamatu with their small army the Gigantes, having apparently picked up a couple of mercenary Arabian spears. The Adamatu garrison hasn't recovered sufficiently to permit a good chance on the balance bar, but I feel more confident about this defense given the huge number of heavily armored hoplites at our disposal, so we'll definitely be fighting this one manually. We've seen this map several times, and I have a good idea where to defend, setting up troops to block the entrance to the capture point and surround any attacker who approaches from three sides. As the small Pergamon force makes its way in toward the city, my two cavalry units accompanied by a small escort of spearmen make their way around the northern border of the city to prepare for a flanking attack, although they remain hidden from view by the buildings for the moment. The entire Pergamon force, as we've seen before, begins funneling down that long avenue toward the city center, and as they enter the death zone between our three sets of defenders, the shower of arrows from overhead is sufficient to break their first attacking unit before they even make contact. On the opposite end of the attacking column, the Pergamon general and two adjacent slinger units are bringing up the rear, and once enough separation has developed to isolate the slingers, my citizen cavalry swoop in for the kill, taking out the Pergamon missile capability. Once the second slinger unit is annihilated, my cavalry and flanking spearmen as a group rush forward to block the fourth side of the intersection, hammering the Pergamon general and his retinue with a rear attack. I back the cavalry out and then ram another charge into the rear of the adjacent hoplite regiment, each strike routing another Pergamon unit. Before long, the entire Pergamon army is routed at very little cost to our defenders. As we can see in the post-battle screen, we lost only about 100 men and a record low of 4 to friendly fire. I didn't bother to chase down the enemy general and immediately regretted it, seeing that his regiment alone escaped the carnage to ride out once again into the desert, although hopefully he won't be able to cause much further harm at this point. We see quite a lot of Persian forces moving about in Media and Mesopotamia, which is allowed since there are satrapy, but it still makes me a little bit nervous. Rhodes strike again at Hegra, presumably to capture the city since there's nothing left of value to take. Of course, with the garrison in terrible shape, I just surrender the city and allow them to walk in. The loss of the provincial edict in Nabatea is making our income even worse, although the Oracle at Delphi event must be taking some of the sting out of the economic downturn. Having waited through several seasons of Rhodian aggression in Arabia, Diogenes has finally made it to Yathrib to re-establish himself as the boss of the subcontinent. Of course, we have an excellent chance on the auto-resolve with Diogenes' mid to upper tier army with upgraded weapons and veterancy, but the predicted losses are appallingly high, the aggressive stance suggesting nearly 70% of his army wiped out in a Pyrrhic victory. Once again, I think there's been a gross miscalculation, as I have full faith in Diogenes, even under adverse conditions, to say nothing of the matchup in our favor this time. The Rhodians have a large garrison army, but I'm betting we can defeat them easily if we draw them out with the Lithobolos. The reality turns out to be even better than I'd imagined. There's no need to draw the enemy out because they've already sallied out far beyond the walls of the city. I make our setup slightly off-center to the east side on a low hill with Diogenes and his cavalry on the right wing. The Rhodians wheel about and begin approaching as Diogenes swings wide around their northwestern flank. As the Rhodian force makes its slow advance on our defended position, I start skirmishing with their cavalry on the flank with my own javelin-equipped light cavalry, although their heavy citizen cavalry aren't interested in playing the game, stubbornly continuing their march forward in spite of the loss of several men to the javelins. A unit of nearby Toxotai, however, do decide to participate and change their facing and move up to bombard my light cavalry, who retreat before they're subjected to arrow fire. The prospect of facing Diogenes himself in mounted combat is much more to the liking of the Rhodian citizen cavalry, and once he and his Heteroi lancers are in range, the two regiments charge at one another at full speed. The Heteroi lancers prove themselves the better unit by far, almost completely destroying the enemy cavalry in a few short moments, and leaving those remaining for the adjacent Longophoroi to run down. With this engagement concluded, I move my cavalry in to strike the most outlying regiment of Rhodian archers who fall quickly to the massed Seleukid cavalry. The Rhodian general Homer seems briefly interested in dropping back to confront Diogenes himself, but instead wisely continues marching toward our front line with some archers and adjacent spearmen covering him. The Rhodian infantry are preceded on the southeastern side by more cavalry, who are completely ineffective against the wall of pikes forming our front line, while the rest of their infantry find themselves not only fighting the immovable pike wall, but also interspersed Thracian legionaries who stream through the gaps in the pike wall to toss javelins or wade into the melee. As Diogenes' infantry demolish the Rhodian army, Homer looks on in astonishment, finding himself being lured in one direction by the Ethiopian archers, then another by the Hippocontesti skirmish cavalry, his small bodyguard milling about behind the line and unable to connect with anything. Dispatching his Longophoroi and Hippocontesti to destroy the remnants of the Rhodian cavalry, Diogenes and his retinue set to work cycle-charging the rear of the Rhodian line, inflicting terror and mayhem on their formation, multiple units wavering with each impact. Faced with the legionaries on one side, and the ferocious charges of the Heteroi lancers on the other, more and more Rhodian units begin to break and flee, becoming prey for the Longophoroi who roam around behind their line. As the battle outcome becomes more clearly in our favor, Diogenes abandons the difficult work of fighting their unbroken frontline troops to join the carnage of running down survivors in the rear. Eventually, once the losses and bloodshed become appalling enough, the enemy general gives up the fight. We lost 172 men in the battle, and half of those to friendly fire, just over 5% of our force, not even a tenth of the predicted losses. The cavalry got over 1,000 kills by themselves, while the royal peltasts and Thracian accounted for most of the rest. It's a bittersweet victory since we've already lost Hegra, but we're in much better shape to make the attack that our foes will be to defend, if Diogenes can move quickly. To slow down their recuperation, Denia poisons the garrison at Hegra, although I'm not sure if this ability will work for her, as it's been completely ineffective for Eurydice. Seleukos and Euclid too are ready to make an assault this turn, having reached the Parthian minor settlement of Antioch and Margiana, and their forces combined, they're able to take this city and its weak garrison, with relatively light casualties as a result. Before I end the turn, I also move Sophocles up to the edge of the city of Pergamon itself, although he's not quite in range for an attack yet. I'm surprised to see in the end-turn phase a belated arrival of the Parthian armies to the city, and they attack even though Seleukos and Euclid hold a strong advantage, allowing me to auto-resolve the battle, one army destroyed and the other driven back to Amel to the north. Our other enterprising and opportunistic satrapy Sardis is trying to take advantage of Sophocles' position to claim Pergamon for themselves. However, I'm not interested in helping Sardis to grow their tiny kingdom, and I let them make their attack unassisted. With Sophocles' sword raised, and the king of Pergamon's head about to fall, the tiny island of Rhodes and the Katpatukan diaspora have become the major problems for the center of the empire. Although Antiochos Theos has taken a bold step into the Alps, Rome remains a force not to be trifled with, their empire now having grown to encompass all of Italy, Syracuse, and the former Carthaginian kingdom of northern Africa. Out east, Seleukos and Euclid have found success, but face a major new threat in the rebellious satrapy of Parthia, Mithridates having long disobeyed Seleukid authority, but only recently having the impudence to declare outright war, perhaps perceiving weakness in the confusion of dynastic succession and the abdication of Antiochos Soter, an impression that would only be further reinforced if one of the great pillars of the empire were to fall.